I should say quickly, I'm not an economist, I'm a social legal scholar, and also a senior advisor for the Tax Justice Network. My areas of research are I'm lucky enough to encompass criminal law, okay, and also elements of inequality, and inequality between nations and the people within those nations. So this is a very short presentation. I should say it's based on a work in progress, okay? It's based in a work in progress, which is drawing on data from 1987, and what was going on in the world, the UK, Europe, and the US, with regards to construction of an anti-money laundering global framework. Ultimately, I would like some of you to go away more informed. Some of you may have questions. I'd like you can ask me those at the end, okay? But really, you will see from this very short presentation that law enforcement, okay, organized crime policies and tax justice issues don't operate in silos. They affect one another. So historical drug control policies have informed the responses of countries and how they tackle dirty money. And this presentation will show that, very simply put, the perceived national commercial interests of the country, such as the UK, which will be the focus of this presentation, has carried and continues to carry more weight than law enforcement priorities and preferences to fight global crime and end bank secrecy. So, I've got to take you through a bit of background. Contrary to what I tell my students to do, I haven't rehearsed this for 10 minutes, so I'm going to need somebody to watch the clock for me, and I might rush through it, I might speed up, I might miss some bits out. A little bit of background very quickly. 1970, you have the US Organized Crime Control Act, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Control Act, Currency and Foreign Transactions Reporting Act, all passed through under Nixon, okay? Okay, Mike will correct me if I get the history wrong, okay? Mike's my co-author. So all passed through under Nixon, all in the push for the war against drugs, okay? And then in 1986, NBA star Len Bias dies from an overdose of crack cocaine, which reignites this war on drugs, okay? And drug offenders are facing severe sanctions if you're involved in a criminal enterprise and you're laundering money from the drug trade. We see this preoccupation with the war on drugs starts to widen to focus on the preoccupation of the war on dirty money linked to drugs, okay? So how do we go and find the drug traffickers? Let's go after the money. And this was pushed through with the Reagan administration, okay, who brought in the Anti-Drug Abuse Act 1986, and part of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act contained the Money Laundering Control Act 1986, okay? So I'm trying to do, okay. So we have a whole body of US-born legislation, and it's basically telling the world, you know what, we're fed up of drug trafficking, we don't want dirty money in our banks, we need to do something about it. The US do not want this war on drugs to carry on. They want to fight the war on drugs and win the war on drugs, and that means going after the money. June 1987, when my research with Mike starts, okay, we see it's a seminal year because the UN have their first Vienna conference. This Vienna conference leads to what we now know commonly as the 1988 Vienna Convention against narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. So 1987, after 1986, you see all that US policy. In 1987, they're saying, okay, we have to do something about dirty money. We have to do something about dirty money. The US is on board. The UN is on board. So we have an international norm-making body who is also part of this construction. Okay. It's important to note that the US policies I've just talked about and the UN Convention, okay, which was tabled in 1987, contained obligations on financial institutions, in particular banks, to repress money laundering. Obligations which would require banks and financial institutions, credit institutions, to know their customer, okay, to intimately know their customer in some cases. The data we have used shows us that 1987 was again a seminal year for anti-money laundering policy and bankers as enablers. Because the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision started the legislative cogs turning, okay? Not only was the UK having to realize that, okay, the US is, excuse my language, pissed off about money laundering coming from the drug trade. The UN is on our back too. But the US was sneaking off to the Basel Committee with what would later become the first statement of principle, the first set of principles for the Basel Committee. Now, at this point, the US were calling it a code of conduct. A code of conduct for financial institutions conducting transactions, okay? And they tabled this code of conduct at the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. This got back to senior figures at Threadneedle Street, okay, and the British Bankers Association. You need to wait for the article to come out before you see the names, okay? So what happened was the British Bankers Association and those at Threadneedle Street, senior bankers in 1987, were not too happy about the US proposing a code of conduct at the Basel Committee, which was, even though the US were part of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, it was seen ostensibly as an EU-based body because of its location, because of the participants and those who made it up. The US Code of Conduct isolated the UK and seriously irked them because it made a number of requirements on bankers. One, to ensure that robust identification policies were in place before a transaction was made. Two, banks, British banks, must terminate a financial relationship if required information is not provided or is inaccurate, or if there are delays in providing the information. Three, British bankers must prohibit direct or indirect assistance to customers seeking to deceive law enforcement. Four, British bankers must report all instances of illegal activity. Five, British banks and bankers must develop and retain all customer documents, all documents relating to identification. This was the US Code of Conduct that they walked to the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. The British Bankers Association get hold of this Code of Conduct and they say, whoa, no, we're not doing this. This is overstepping the mark. This is extraterritorial jurisdiction, and an extension of that, we're not happy. Cutting a long story short, you will see that that Code of Conduct was watered down significantly to appease some of those countries. Okay, so for example, the phrase illegal activity was taken out of the initial code, replaced with criminal activity. This narrowed the scope and application of that set of principles and meant that countries such as Belgium could go on with tax evasion without being questioned. Okay. 1987, so that's my research here, 1987 at the moment, so sorry if I can't think outside of that box. Commission of European Communities, they start to get a bit twitchy too. Okay, the US is talking about money laundering, they've gone to the Basel Committee, the US is developing all these new policies in the war against drugs, and the EC say, we aren't happy. We're not very happy about the US coming in and saying we have to do all these things. So what I want to all EC, I'm pretending to be Gerald Fitzhugh. That's how much I'm into my research at the moment. I'm taking on the character. Mr. Fitzhugh, Directorate General of Financial Institutions, Company Law for the Commission of European Communities in 1987, wrote a letter to senior members at Threadneedle Street and Her Majesty's Treasury saying, I'm sending out an EC questionnaire to all member states. Please tell me about your anti-money laundering policies. If we stand together, we can fight US extraterritorial jurisdiction. We'll have a stronger argument for opposing any of those obligations they want us to take on. Okay? Now, don't forget, all those member states, quite a number of them have very strong bank secrecy laws, okay? And the US Code of Conduct is saying, water down your bank secrecy. So Fitzhugh is thinking, if all European countries can come together, and I don't even know anymore in 2019 if we're part of Europe or not, but I'm referring to Europe, okay? If we come together, we can fight what the US want to do. Now, rather than the UK thinking, this sounds a good idea, let's join the EU, they actually get peed off by the EC suggestion, okay? The UK assert the position that, yes, we will fill in the EC questionnaire on money laundering, but we do not accept community competence in this area. In fact, one senior figure from HMT said, I'm putting out the feelers to see what the Commission are up to, because we don't accept community competence in this area. Rachel Lomax, at the time Under Secretary of the at HMT, later to become, I think, the first assistant director at the Bank of England, first female director at the Bank of England or something. She has a line where she says, we will not go anywhere near anything that forces us into unilateral coercion. So we are not going to side with anybody who forces us into a position which is not advantageous for us, okay? So Fitch says it. Let's oppose extraterritorial jurisdiction. If we gather all countries together, we can do that. Hence, we can protect our bank secrecy laws, we can protect our economic trade. Where's this, the flickers? Okay. So, in 1987, we see that the UK is remaining on board. Okay, it's like, yeah, we're gonna play ball with the EC, we're gonna seem to be compliant, but we don't like community competence in this area, and we have a trade to protect, and that trade is our banking and finance industry. Okay. 1987, November. Go on a couple of months. We've just moved on from August. Letters start going around HM Treasury, Threadneedle Street, Economic Relations Department of the FCO, Treasury solicitors, and a couple of others who I can't mention at the moment. Graham Kempfield wrote to Douglas Board at HM Treasury and said, have you seen this document? Have you seen this document entitled Creation of a European Financial Area? They were aghast. They couldn't believe it. How can this be happening? How can this be happening? We've already had a questionnaire we've had to complete. The EC are already overstating their competence in this area. And now they're trying to create a European financial area. You know why they were irked? Why the British Bankers Association started to get seriously irked was because this creation of a European financial area would mean reporting requirements to do with tax, reporting requirements on people within your own country who were putting the money elsewhere or somewhere in the UK. Okay? In fact, there was a general obligation on banks to disclose the income of their clients. To do this would require the removal of the legal or administrative requirements governing bank secrecy. Douglas Board replied to Graham Kempfield, and he said, such a regime will not be easy to reconcile with UK attitudes as reflected by the British Bankers Association. And they used a dictum, I think I'm coming up to my 10 minutes, I'll tell you. They used a dictum from 1775, Lord Mansfield's dictum from 1775. They are still using it today to justify bank secrecy, criminogenic enabling laws that enable financial crimes of various types to take place. And that is, the courts of this country do not enforce the revenue laws of another country. Lord Mansfield said that in 1775. They were using it in 1987. They're still using it now. Okay. The final note, the EC said, Kempfield said on board, the EC need to realise they are not the people to deal with the problem of money laundering. And other countries with bank secrecy laws, this was said in 1987, will wish to object as strongly as the UK. Very quickly, we get to 1991. We have the Council Directive 91, which again required records of identification. We're seeing the European countries pushing through, trying to get through some type of watering down of bank secrecy. This was my final slide. Of course, that's what happened. The US went on to create the FATF. No coincidence, by the way, that when the FATF was created in 1989, people at Basel said, oh, that's going to be confusing for countries, two of us. But if you read into it, you'll see the FATF was created when the US realized its code of conduct had been watered down by the Basel. Let's create a new body, push policy through that way. Hell, why not? The EU went on to adopt 4 directives. Of course, we left. The UK voted to leave the EU in 2015, just as the 4th directive was coming through, pushing for greater transparency. It's no coincidence that the biggest Brexit supporters had vested interest in keeping bank secrecy alive and kicking. In 2018, last year, the UK receives its highest ever Financial Action Task Force rating. In 2020, who knows? Will we have a new 5th anti-money laundering EU directive transposed into law? I just want to say one final note, one sentence to finish this off. Simply put, the research we are working on at the moment shows that at every level from 1987 onwards, commercial interests, protecting trade, protecting the banking industry of the UK have superseded law enforcement efforts to stop organised crime, including financial crimes, and that's money laundering, tax evasion, whatever you want to put under that umbrella, at every level. So much so that in the data we are looking at, there is not one police officer, not one law enforcement officer involved in all of the dialogue. And what we see is the creation of an AML framework which has been constructed, people, by the bankers of Threadneedle Street, by those at the British Bankers Association, by Treasury solicitors, and others in HMT. Law enforcement officers were not involved. They were merely given a little nod, like, that's good, you agree with us. You agree with us, don't you? I should end it there. Okay, thank you.